Let's try to understand a very important and a very simple concept that most of the students gets confused with. That's the difference between nominal exchange rate and a real exchange rate. Later, we will be discussing the difference between nominal effective exchange rate and a real effective exchange rate. So, you people might have come across the terms like nominal GDP, real GDP, nominal income, nominal interest rate, real interest rate. Whenever you come across the word called nominal and real, just remember the fact is real variable is always nominal variable adjusted to inflation. Adjusted to inflation. What do you mean by adjusting to inflation? That is something we'll try to figure out here. But if you could recollect the way you computed nominal GDP, it's simply the GDP computed at the current market prices. Whereas real GDP is the GDP computed at a constant price or a base year price. Isn't it? Similarly, when it comes to nominal income is simply the income that you make per month or per annum. But what is real income? The basket of goods that your money could buy. That's what we happen to call as a real income. Because my 1 lakh salary per month could purchase a good amount of basket, let's say last year, but the same 1 lakh rupees right now cannot buy the same basket. The reason because prices of goods and services I generally consume might have experienced a rise in price. So my inflation, the inflation in my country erodes the purchasing power of my currency. Isn't it? Henceforth, 1 lakh rupees of salary is what might make you happy some 5 years back, but the same 1 lakh rupees salary in Delhi doesn't make you happy right now. Am I right? The reason? The purchasing power of the currency has eroded. Isn't it? So that's what I mean to say adjusting to inflation. So now let's go ahead in trying to apply the similar concept and same logic to understand the difference between nominal exchange rate and real exchange rate. But how would you define the term exchange rate? Exchange rate is simply the value of a currency expressed in terms of other currency. Like the marker that I am using, imagine this costs $1,000. It does mean the shopkeeper or the seller of this particular marker is willing to exchange this particular marker in return for 1,000 rupees of mine. That's it. So if you happen to look at, imagine, I'm just trying to assume that 80 rupees right now is the price of $1. Or what I mean to say, 80 rupees is what you require to forego to purchase $1 in the market. That's what's the price. Is it going to be constant forever? No. Who happened to determine the price? That 80 rupees is required to buy $1. How is it decided? IMF, World Bank, UNO, Indian government, RBI. So if you have noticed the fact, and if you're regularly going through newspaper, you could figure it out. The value of rupee in terms of other currencies is not constant. So every day you could see that rupee has experienced a rise, fall. People use these terms, rupee appreciated, depreciated. Rupee is no longer the same price, isn't it, for $1, isn't it? So who happened to determine? Like the way the price of this marker is determined, the price of onion, potato is determined, the same logic is what you could apply. So how is the price of dollar in my Indian market is determined is purely based upon demand and supply. That's it. Demand and supply. So if more Indians are willing to buy more dollars and you don't have enough supply of dollars in the market, what's going to happen? Obviously, people willingness to forego more rupees for dollar increases. Because there's a great amount of demand for dollar and the market doesn't have enough supply of dollars, henceforth, dollar tend to appreciate. So when dollar tend to appreciate, does mean people are willing to forego more rupees in return for $1. Isn't it? So in such case, can I end up simply concluding the fact when dollar appreciates, iska matlab hai rupees depreciating. Now, let's say the same case. So how would you call rupee depreciation? In what context? Imagine now Indians are willing to forego 100 rupees for the same dollar. Got it? So if you look at it, here in this case, 80 rupees is required to buy $1, but now you need 100 rupees to buy $1. So most of you would have the perception 100 is more than 80, then why is this gentleman calling rupees depreciating? Rupees depreciating. Isn't it? So just don't try to compare the absolute number. Just look at the number of rupees you are willing to forego. Okay? Or look at the other way around. Look at the other way around. Imagine 80 rupees equal to a dollar. That means 1 rupee is equal to 1 by 80th of a dollar. Am I right? Can I write this way? But whereas in this case, 1 rupee is equal to 1 by 100th of a dollar. So you could simply convert $1 into 100 cents and write it by 80. And this 100 cents divided by 100, which is equal to 1. That means for every 1 cent of American, okay, for every 1 American cent, we are willing to forego 1 rupee. But whereas in this case, we are expecting more than that. We are expecting more than that, isn't it? So my rupee in this case is relatively costly than compared to this scenario. Am I right? Do you accept the fact 100 by 80 is more than 1? Am I right? Isn't it? It's somewhere around 5 or 4. It's going to be 1.25. So 1.25 is greater than 1. Isn't it? That's the reason. So whenever rupee happens to go from 80 to 100, you could say the nominal exchange rate is decreasing. Nominal exchange rate is decreasing. Does mean the number of rupees I am willing to forego in return for 1 unit of foreign currency is reducing. My rupee is become cheaper, and that's where I use the term called depreciation of my rupee. Whereas if it's the other way around, from 100 if it goes to 80, does mean the number of rupees I'm willing to forego in return for a foreign currency is increasing. So henceforth I would use the term called appreciation. And I simply say that my nominal exchange rate is increasing in this case. That means the rate at which I am willing to exchange my currency for a foreign currency is increasing. I am expecting more. That's it. And henceforth, my currency is said to experience a rise in value in comparison to the foreign currency. And I use the term nominal exchange rate is increasing. My rupee is appreciating. Is that clear now? So now let's go ahead and try to figure out the difference between real exchange rate and nominal exchange rate. But before that, let me give you a very simple example. Let's say, as of now, $1 is fetching you 80 rupees, and I call this as a nominal exchange rate. So generally, when we try to figure out the real exchange rate, we generally compare the basket of goods, okay, in different markets. That makes sense. But to make things simple, to keep our conversation simple, I would simply consider, as of now, a basket is nothing but a simple basket that consists of the pen that I'm using. Let's suppose the basket that I'm considering is only the pen I'm using. So if I happen to keep on using the basket or pen, don't get confused. You could simply interchange. That's it. So now let's take the case. In India, this particular pen I am using, in India, the pen I am using is costing you rupees 20. Whereas the same pen in United States of America is costing you $1. Got it? $1. But this dollar is fetching you rupees 80 of India. That means 80 rupees of India now could fetch you 4 pence of India. Isn't it? Can I say so? Yes. It does mean if an American has $1 in his pocket and he is interested in buying a pen, he has two different options. One, he could simply convert the dollar for a pen in his country, or he could convert the dollar for 80 rupees of India, and 80 rupees could fetch him 4 pence of India. For now, just ignore the cost of transportation. Ignore the tariff structure like import duty, export duty, and all these things. Just imagine you people could simply order any basket of goods from any part of the world, somewhere from like Alibaba, Amazon, whatever it could be. So ignore the cost of transportation. Let's not make things complicated. Ignore the tariff structure. So you could simply convert your dollars into rupees for the sake of buying any basket from any part of the world. And in this case, let's say India. So if you are an American who has $1 in your pocket, tell me, would you like to buy an American marker or an Indian marker? It's definitely an Indian marker, because every dollar would fetch you 4 similar units of India. And that's what I mean to say real exchange rate. So now I could express the same thing as 4 pence of India is equal to 1 pen of a USA. Or the best thing is 4 baskets of Indian goods. And the basket is expected to consist of same goods is equal to 1 basket of similar goods of USA. Got it? So now you might have noticed, rather than expressing in terms of monetary terms, I am expressing the exchange rate in terms of a basket of goods. That's it. And that's where real exchange rate comes into picture. And that's what I mean to say adjusting to inflation. That's it. So it does mean, in simple terms, nominal is always expressed in terms of monetary units. Real is something you could simply take it as expressed in terms of basket of goods and services. That's it. So now how would you interpret it? 4 pence or 4 basket of Indian goods is equal to 1 basket of American good, and henceforth more of Americans would be interested in consuming Indian goods. So let me try to generalize this by simply using a formula. So that the very common formula we'll be using to compute the real exchange rate is nominal exchange rate multiplied by the ratio of price level, P star divided by P. And E stands for the nominal exchange rate. E stands for the nominal exchange rate, that is 80 per dollar. And P star stands for foreign price level. So what is the price level or price of the basket in foreign country, or in this case United States of America? That is $1. And P stands for domestic price level. So what's the domestic price of this pen? It's 20. So now if we could compute, calculate, it's again going to be 4. That's it. So whatever I happen to express in terms of basket of goods and services, that 4 basket of Indian goods is equal to 1 basket of American goods. And how did I get to know this number? Is simple. This formula helps you figure it out. So now how would you interpret it? It simply does 4 baskets or 4 pens of India is equal to 1 pen of USA. Or I could write the same as 1 pen or 1 basket of Indian goods is equal to 1/4 of USA. 1/4 of the same basket of USA. Got it? So that's how you could express it. Now, what do you mean by real exchange rate increasing? Real exchange rate increasing. And what would be the impact? Or what do you mean by real exchange rate decreasing, and what is the impact? Imagine if my price of pen, rather than 20, if it is going to be 40, in such case, what would be the value? If you replace 20 with 40, the real exchange rate would be 2. So now most of you get confused. 4 is bigger than 2. Then why is this gentleman says real exchange rate is increasing? It's not the question. That's not the way you need to look into it. So in this case, when pen happens to cost me 40 rupees in India, this value has come down to 2. But how would you interpret it? It does mean, in this case, for every 2 pence or for every 1 pen of USA, or for every 1 basket of Indian goods of USA, you get only 2 baskets or 2 pence of India. So have you noticed something different in both the cases? So, iska pehle, for every 1 basket of American goods, I am generous enough to exchange 4 baskets of my Indian goods. But now, for every 1 basket of American goods, I am willing to exchange only 2 baskets. So now you tell me, what happens to the value of my basket of goods and services expressed in terms of foreign basket? Don't you think it happened to experience a rise? Am I right? Isn't it? So I am expecting more of American goods for every 1 basket of my Indian goods. Isn't it? So that's where I say my real exchange rate. I mean to say my exchange rate in terms of real terms, or what you call in terms of goods and services, has experienced a rise because I'm expecting more from Americans. Got it? So you could also further draw some interesting fact. That is, when the real exchange rate is increasing, what is going to happen? The export competitiveness of the country would reduce. Export competitiveness of the country reduces. What does it mean? It's simple. Look at, if you are an American, if this is the real exchange rate, for every 1 basket, you could exchange 4 baskets of India. That means he is getting 4 baskets of Indian goods, but now he could only exchange for 2 baskets. So does mean what happened to the foreign consumption of Indian goods and services that has reduced, because the American is getting lesser and lesser basket of Indian goods, and henceforth an increase in real exchange rate is what I mean to say results in a decrease in export competitiveness. But whereas a decrease in real exchange rate, imagine if this particular price becomes rupees 10 and the value becomes 8. In such case, for every one basket of American goods, we are willing to exchange 8 baskets of similar goods of India. It does mean our basket of goods in terms of American goods has become much cheaper. And that's where I would say the real exchange rate has come down. So when the real exchange rate has come down, does mean my export competitiveness has increased. So now Americans prefer consuming more of Indian goods. Am I right? Because for every one basket, they could exchange 8 similar baskets of Indian goods. So I could sell more to Americans, and they would be much happy because their dollar happens to fetch a very good amount of goods from India, isn't it? So that's what's the difference between normal exchange rate and a real exchange rate. But before concluding it, let me also help you understand how the domestic prices, in fact, I already happened to show you, but how the domestic prices would have an impact on the real exchange rate, and what would be the impact of this rising export competitiveness on your normal exchange rate and rest of the variables. So now let's try to look at the same scenario. 80 rupees is fetching you a dollar, or a dollar fetches you 80 rupees. And in India, this 80 rupees can buy you 4 pence. And the dollar in USA could buy only 1 pen of USA, one basket of goods of USA. Got it? I'm just simply using the same logic. So now, how did we compute the real exchange rate? It's E, normal exchange rate, multiplied by P star divided by P. And you know the fact that if this is the scenario, most of Americans would be happy consuming Indian goods. So what do you think would be the result of more Americans consuming Indian goods? That results in increase in demand for the Indian goods and services. Because our basket of goods and services are much cheaper in comparison to the American goods. Henceforth, more of foreigners would prefer consuming Indian goods. So when there is more consumption of Indian goods, what happens? The demand for Indian goods and services, they rises. When the demand rises, it's common, it's obvious, the price of goods and services in India rises. Isn't it? And since no American is happy consuming, in this case, no American is happy consuming the pen or the basket of goods from USA. So what do you think would be the obvious consequence is the demand for the same basket in USA would reduce. As a result, the price level in foreign country reduces. Got it? So now you could notice there is an increase in demand for Indian goods, hence for the price increase, and the foreign price level decreases because of less consumption. That's not where basically the impact ends. Now look at the exchange rate, normal exchange rate. What do you think would be the impact on normal exchange rate? Does normal exchange rate rise or fall? In fact, I would say it rises. I mean to say, my rupee in this case would end up becoming costly. The reason? Many Americans are happy consuming Indian goods and they prefer converting their dollars into rupees. So what would be the consequence? Too many dollars would start chasing too few of my rupees. When too many dollars chases too few rupees, what is going to happen to my normal exchange rate? It increases, isn't it? So my rupee becomes so costly. Let's say 80 per dollar, it might end up shooting up to 60 per dollar, isn't it? So it does mean that, okay, so in fact I would say in absolute terms my rupee value, okay, is reducing, right? Of course my normal exchange rate is increasing. So now you could simply see that the value in the numerator is reducing and the value in the denominator is increasing. To what extent this particular phenomena continues, it is believed that it would continue until the real exchange rate tends to 1. So what does it mean the real exchange rate tends to 1? It does mean a certain basket of goods is more or less traded at the similar prices in different parts of the world. And this is what we call as law of one price. Law of one price. That is what is expected to happen when you have a different real exchange rates. I mean, a basket of goods, if it costs you different prices in different markets of the world, people believe that results in one country exporting the goods to other country, and that alters the demand and supply and would result in a uniform price for the same basket in different parts of the world. And that's what we generally call as a law of one price or a uniform price. It's as simple as that. Let's suppose, imagine in Karol Bagh, we have onions trading at 40 rupees per kilo in Karol Bagh. And 2 kilometers down the line, let's say New Rajendra Nagar, if the price of onions is costing you 80 rupees per kilo, do you really think that is it really practically possible in 2 kilometers of distance the same product could be traded at two different prices? No. If in Karol Bagh, if it is available at 40 rupees per kilo, whereas in the nearby Rajendra Nagar, it costs you 80 rupees per kilo, what do you think someone who knows this fact would do? He would end up buying in the market where it is cheaper and start selling in the market where it is costly. Because outrightly, you could simply make 40 rupees of profit for every 1 kilo. In fact, this is what we call arbitrage. So taking the advantage of price difference in different markets, because the same good is being traded at different prices in two different markets. Henceforth, it is better to take an advantage. Buy it in the market where it is cheaper, sell it in the market where it is costly. You make money. So let's suppose I figured it out and I started procuring in Karol Bagh and I started selling in a New Rajendra Nagar. And I started minting money. Looking at me, someone else joins and he does the same practice. And together, what are we going to do? Our actions results in increase in demand for onions in the markets of Karol Bagh, thereby prices keeps rising. But since we are all simply increasing supply of onions in New Rajendra Nagar, what's going to happen to the price of onions in New Rajendra Nagar? It reduces. So henceforth, we people would tend to ensure that the price of onions more or less remains similar in both the markets. Because if there is a difference, traders always like to take an advantage. And that results in a particular commodity being traded at uniform price in different markets of the world. And that's what we call law of one price or a uniform price. And that's what this particular real exchange rate 10 to 1 does mean. So whenever there's a price difference between a certain basket of goods in different parts of the world, people try to consume in those markets where it is cheaper. Or people try to buy it in the market where it is cheaper and sell in the market where it's costly. And that results in the change in supply demand functions, and henceforth the price might end up remaining uniform at some point of time. But is it practically possible? No. The reason, let's take the case of a haircut in India. Generally people say when you are in India, better have a haircut. When you are in United States of America, it's better to shave your head. Simple. Because these kind of labor intensive services in India is much cheaper. Whereas if you look at United States of America, the same labor intensive goods or services is relatively costly, because the advantage that we have is we are a labor surplus country. And the advantage the Americans has is they are a capital surplus country, isn't it? And that's the reason, if you have noticed it, whenever your brother or sister visits India from abroad, or let's say USA, what does he bring in? Mostly capital intensive goods. But why is flying back? When he is flying back from India to USA, what does he takes in? Labor intensive goods. That's it. So in real world, it's not practically possible for a certain basket to be traded at a uniform price in different parts of the world. The reason? I'll just list out some three important reasons. One major reason is the transportation cost. The transportation costs. That's it. You cannot move in everything. The second is, obviously, the tariff structures. The tariff structures. And the third most important reason is, by this time you have noticed it. Not every good and service could be traded, could be exchanged or traded. That's not all goods and services could be traded. That's it. So inability to trade or exchange. Iska matlab hai, just because services like haircut or laundry services India cheaper, do you really think the Americans would fly to India just to consume these services? Or do you really think it makes sense India to export these people who happen to offer the services like a haircut and laundry services? It's not possible. So there are certain basket of goods and services which cannot be traded. And that's a very basic reason why Okay, theoretically, though economists believe that there would be a law of uniform price, and over a period of time, the real exchange rate tends to 1, but in real world, it might not happen because of these constraints. And I hope you understood the pretty difference between normal exchange rate and real exchange rate. So, normal exchange rate is simply the exchange rate expressed in the current market value. That's it. So how much rupees I need to forego to buy 1 unit of a foreign currency? So if it costs me 80 rupees per dollar, it doesn't necessarily mean it costs me the same rupees to buy a pound sterling, to buy a yen, to buy a yuan. It all depends upon the demand and supply. That's it. So that's a very strange reason why you might be noticing in the in the recent past, rupee is depreciating against a dollar. But if you could notice, if you are regularly going through newspaper, you might also have noticed a very strange fact. Though rupee is losing value against dollar, but rupee is appreciating against certain other hard currencies like pound, euro, and yen and yuan. That's it. It can happen. Like onion becoming cheaper doesn't necessarily mean everything else is becoming cheaper. Or one particular good in India is becoming costly doesn't necessarily mean my rupee is losing purchasing power against all basket of goods and services. Not necessary. That's it. Okay. So we'll try to figure it out. What's the reasons behind rupee depreciation? Maybe in the next session. But okay, I hope you got the difference. So normal exchange rate is simply the value of our currency expressed in terms of other currency at the current market rates. But real exchange rate is simply the same exchange rate expressed in terms of basket of goods and services, or what you call nominal exchange rate adjusted to inflation. Got it?